In these last days, is Satan using an old tactic that we call critical theory? That's right. It goes way back. And we're going to talk about it with William Federer. He's back. Welcome to the last dispensation. You're living in it. Bill, or William J. Federer, or we can call him Bill, is a nationally known speaker. He's been on the program before, best-selling author and president of AmeriSearch Incorporated, a publishing company dedicated to researching America's noble heritage. He hosts the Daily American Minute radio feature and the Faith in History television series, which air across America on various networks. Federer is also a former U.S. congressional candidate and has appeared on numerous major media outlets. Now, in this awesome interview, it was very sobering, very eye-opening about what's going on today in these last days. We'll be exploring the historical roots of critical theory and its connections to ancient philosophies and religious concepts. Federer will take us on a fascinating journey through time, drawing parallels between modern ideologies and historical examples from the Bible, ancient Rome, and Greece. He argues, check this out, that critical theory has deep roots in history and antiquity, extending far beyond its modern incarnations. And I would even go as far as to say the premortal life and what he would call the war in heaven as well. He is not a member of the church, but he is a believer in Christ and a devout Christian himself. He provides numerous examples from various historical periods to support the claim that that is exactly what Lucifer is using right now. Throughout the interview, you will find that Bill will be drawing on his extensive knowledge of history to illustrate his points, that where he cites examples from the Bible to show certain ideological patterns that have existed for millennia, references to ancient Rome, Greece, and used to demonstrate the longevity of certain philosophical concepts that underpin critical theory. What really drew me in and intrigued me, brothers and sisters, was his comparison, his analysis of Satan's methods to those of Niccolo Machiavelli. His comparisons of Satan's methods to those of Niccolo Machiavelli, the Renaissance-era political philosopher. He suggests that the adversary is employing Machiavellian tactics in the modern world to advance his cause. Federer presents critical theory, describing it as a religion of works. He argues that this ideology demands constant repentance without offering forgiveness. Brothers and sisters, without further ado, let me welcome William Federer. I am thankful once again to have, I could call you brother. We are brothers in Christ. This is the second time that I've had William Federer on the program. And if you don't know who he is, you do have a YouTube channel, correct? I know you have a website, and we post it right here. But what is your, do you have a place on YouTube that people can go?
My website's AmericanMinute.com, and there's a media tab, and you can click on it and watch stuff on YouTube and Rumble and lots of other different platforms, Instagram. And wrote a book called Socialism, The Real History from Plato to the Present. And a lot of it, I go through the Cold War tactics, and maybe the audience might be interested in that.
Absolutely. So I asked you off camera, because you talk about a lot of things. One day we're going to get into your president's presentation, but today I asked you if you would speak on something more tied into what we might be seeing today around us, maybe with Israel, maybe, I don't know. You are going to present something and surprise me. I said, surprise me today. And that's what you're going to do.
Yeah. So I just did a new book. It's called Silence Equals Consent, the Sin of Omission. And I tackle something at the beginning of the book called Christian nationalism. And I highlight how nationalism is the opposite of globalism. And there are people who are globalists, like Brock Chisholm was the first director of the World Health Organization. And many people are familiar with that organization. And he said, to achieve world government, it is necessary to remove from the minds of men their national patriotism. So lo and behold, globalists do not want people that want to preserve their nation. Now, how do they plan on setting up their global world government? Are people just going to voluntarily give up control of their lives? Not likely. So there's something called the Great Reset, and it's an orchestrated crisis. Food shortage crises, healthcare crises, financial collapse crises. You had the Klaus Schwab of the World Economic Forum said, the world must brace for a series of massive unknown crises. It's like, how does he know about all this? And so when you go through and look, Klaus Schwab released a video, Agenda 2030, that said you'll own nothing and be happy. Own nothing, own nothing. It sort of sounds like Karl Marx, who said the theory of communism may be summed up in a single sentence: abolition of private property.
Right.
So if you abolish private property, you'll own nothing. So lo and behold, the globalists want world communism. Michael Rechtenwald wrote in Imprimis magazine, What is the Great Reset? 12/21. He said, it's a two-tiered economy. This is a great reset. A two-tiered economy with profitable monopolies and the state on top, and socialism for the majority below. So that's what they want. They want to set up where they're in control. And nationalism also is good or bad depending on the nation.
I'm drinking Cardio Miracle, and they asked me to, they're sponsoring me now.
Nice.
And I'm new to it, but I'm going to tell you, man, I've been using this for about a week and I feel great. And that is no joke.
If I could have, I would have started taking this when I was 20.
It's like a secret weapon to your health.
Cardio Miracle has been a game changer in my life.
I feel good all over when I take it.
Cardio Miracle has created a pathway for me to be healthy.
This is something that's actually made a huge difference.
Cardio Miracle is one of the best things that ever happened to me.
For me as a doctor, I have seen Cardio Miracle improve the lives of many of my patients with many different types of chronic conditions.
Cardio Miracle has extended my husband's life.
Cardio Miracle has saved our life. Literally.
You know, I don't know anything more powerful than to say, I have my own family doing this.
If you're not doing it, Jay, you need to get on it, and I'll give you 15. Everybody that signs up with me now, there's the QR code right there. You just put your phone up to it and you get it, the link, and then go
There we go.
Yep. Or the link is in my description field, and you go to buyproduct.cardiomiraclehealth.com. That's buyproduct.cardiomiraclehealth.com. And I'm still learning about it, but it is basically, it is exactly what it says, and it's delicious. Even though it's delicious, I mix it with grape flavored drink. You can mix it with juice, anything you want, or you can drink it plain. And you just drink 2 servings a day. Most people do, 1 in the morning, 1 in the evening. And it's the ultimate solution for cardiovascular health and overall well-being.
And so globalists don't like it because there's no individual rights, and they want to establish that. Socialist, Islamist countries don't believe in individual rights. They want to be the dispenser of rights. It's a pyramid structure. If you're friends with the people on top, you're more equal. If you're not their friends, you're less equal. If you're their enemy, you're dead. It's called treason, or you're a slave. Well, America, we believe in individual rights from a creator. And why is that important? The creator gave them, not the government. So if the government gives them, the government can take them away. But if they come from a source higher than the government, then it changes the government's purpose to protecting and guaranteeing to you your creator-given rights. And these rights include freedom of religion, freedom of speech, freedom of conscience, freedom of press, freedom of assembly, freedom to protect your wife and family, freedom to a trial by a jury of your peers, and freedom from cruel and unusual punishment. These are sort of good things. And then everyone's equal. And to top it all off, it's government from the consent of the governed. So you have literally, how could a nation get any better than that? You have rights the government cannot take away. The government's purpose is to guarantee to you your rights. Everyone's equal, and you're in charge. Government from the consent of the governed. And it's like Lincoln's Gettysburg, the government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth. So nationalism is the opposite of globalism. Nationalism is good or bad, depending on the nation. And finally, Christian nationalism used to be called Christian patriotism. The modern usage of that term in its derogatory sense really started around 2006. Prior to that, it was Christian patriotism. Even Noah Webster's 1828 dictionary, the word nationalism is not in there. The word patriotism is characteristic of a good citizen, love of one's country. And so you have George Washington said, to the distinguished character of patriot, it should be our highest glory to laud the more distinguished character of Christian. Lincoln's inaugural intelligence, patriotism, Christianity are still competent to adjust in the best way all our present difficulty. Lincoln mentions patriotism and Christianity right next to each other in his inaugural. FDR passed out Gideon's New Testaments during World War II, millions of them. And so he's defending our nation and he's passing out Bibles. I wonder if the mainstream media would call him a Christian nationalist. Roosevelt said, the whole world is divided between pagan brutality and the Christian ideal. We choose human freedom, which is the Christian ideal. Eisenhower, he said, any group that awakens all of us is a dedicated patriotic group that can well take the Bible in one hand, the flag in the other, and march ahead. Our country never had a problem with Bibles and flags. And in 1965, 93% of the country was Christian. 1965, 93% of the country. I even got these statistics off the CIA.gov website.
Wow.
I've been keeping track with it for decades. And where you have the country is 69% Protestant, 24% Catholic. But the left blames us for what they're doing. It's called psychological projection. And they are the ones that want to establish a nationalism, a woke nationalism. And they want to blame you for what they're doing. I even found a copy of the 1960 December issue of the Military Review. And they had an article in there on a review of Soviet psychological warfare. And it says it's based on the propaganda technique of name calling. Psychologists call it projection. If you do something wrong, accuse your enemy of doing it before he accuses you. Let me say that again. If you do something wrong, accuse your enemy of doing it before they accuse you. The one who makes the accusation first has the advantage. And he says it's like little children saying he hit me first, right? And so this has gotten into, in 2012, Obama authorized using these tactics, these psychological warfare tactics, he called them behavioral sciences, on the American population. So we were using them on the battlefield, right, in other countries during the Cold War to keep countries from falling into the Soviet orbit. Obama took all that outward-facing machinery and focused it inward for political reasons. And in 2016, he passed the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Disinformation Act, which gave him authority to censor all the media and social platforms in America for the sake of national security. It's the government's job. All they have to do is call something Russian propaganda and they can censor it. And of course, it's up to them to decide what is and what's not.
Before I forget, brothers and sisters, if you are enjoying the content, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ding the bell for notifications. Your support means the world to me and helps the channel grow. And hey, if you want to contribute to the program, I do prefer Venmo first, then Cash App, then PayPal, then Zelle. And I've got cool products. I got cool merch. That's all being designed. I get a percentage of it. And that's if you're interested. Remember, your comments are what keep this community thriving. So drop your thoughts below. And if you're feeling extra generous, consider becoming a YouTube member or sending a thanks, a super thanks right there. The button's right below the screen during our videos. Now back to the topic.
And so this concept of blaming others for what you're doing, there was an interesting quote from Charlie Hurt, and he was on Fox News with Hannity, May 23rd, 2019. And he says, this whole thing is like this game of projection. Whatever they accuse President Trump of doing, we then find out not only did Trump not do it, but they did it. And so Hillary Clinton was colluding with Russia. She was Secretary of State, approved Uranium One, transferring a fifth of the U.S. uranium to Russia. So what does she do? She accuses Trump of what she's guilty of. She pays for a Steele dossier to accuse Trump of colluding with Russia. Biden is on C-SPAN admitting to extortion, saying, stop investigating my son, or I'm going to hold back billions of dollars of U.S. aid. What do they want to do? They want to accuse Trump of extorting Ukraine. Biden had classified documents in his garage. And so what do? They stage a very, very visible raid on Mar-a-Lago simply for the headline's sake. They wanted to accuse Trump of having classified documents instead, so that when it finally comes out that Biden had them, by that time, it's old news. And so these tactics are used for 50 years during the Cold War, and they've been perfected. And so I get into this in my book called Socialism, the Real History from Plato to the Present. And there's even a story, this is from Sanford Horowitz, wrote a book on Saul Alinsky, Let Them Call Me Rebel. And he writes, in 1972, students asked Alinsky to help plan a protest of a scheduled speech by George H.W. Bush, then U.S. Representative to the United Nations. He told them to go to this rally dressed as members of the Ku Klux Klan, and whenever Bush said something in defense of the Vietnam War, they should cheer and wave placards reading, "The KKK supports Bush." And this is what the students did with very successful results. So you infiltrate your opponent's rally to distract and change and do things that will reflect negatively on that opponent. And you just can't help but draw on the connection between January 6th.
So it's kind of a tactic where you've got them in a place where all eyes are on them. And then you have a public demonstration that, like you said earlier, projects who you really are. And it's funny how even I'm reminded of Nancy Pelosi when she literally would come out and tell on herself when she talked about the smear, when she's like telling everyone the wrap-up smear, where she's telling everybody publicly how we do our evil deeds. It's horrible.
Right. So Nancy Pelosi was the one explaining how this works when she was being interviewed. And she said, you accuse your opponent of what you're guilty of, and then the media picks it up and spreads it. And so usually they would use something that's like Slate or BuzzFeed or The Atlantic, and they would introduce some smear, and then the other major, more mainstream news outlets would quote from that fringe outlet, and then they would reverberate it. And we used to do that. Andrew Breitbart was a master at it. But then once they put in all their censorship, they can see what stories are trending and then cancel them. And but they don't cancel themselves. But one of the interesting things that I talk about in my book on socialism is psychological warfare. And this is something that was used throughout the Cold War. Countries would be siding with the West, and the KGB would infiltrate and would cause problems. They would often categorize the country into groups and then pit the groups against each other. So they would organize the proletariat against the bourgeois, the working class against the business owners, or they'd organize the blacks against the whites, or the Muslims against the Christians, or the Catholics against the Protestants, or the Hutus against the Tutsis in the Congo and Rwanda. Really didn't matter what the sides were and what the issues were. Their goal was conflict. And then when it destabilized and got the whole country into fear, people would trade their freedom for security. And then they would present themselves as the answer, and they could give any type of speech you wanted. It'd be like Kamala giving a speech saying, I want to secure the borders. It's like everybody knows that there's no intent of doing that because she's in office right now, and there's no intent to secure the border. And with her even being the border czar, there's zero. Matter of fact, they estimate about 12 million have come into the country.
Wow.
And so the idea is that you give whatever speech you want, but you're just lying. And even Machiavelli said that if people are naive enough to believe your lie, they'll be naive enough to believe your excuse of why you didn't do what you said you were going to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then he would, even Muhammad said warfare is deception. And so the
Well, isn't that where we get the term? Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but isn't that where we get the term divide and conquer? You divide the masses, get them against each other, or we call it playing the right-left paradigm.
Yeah, so that's a great segue into my presentation. So the most common form of government in world history is kings. Power concentrates into the hands of one person who's basically a glorified gang leader. And democracies and republics are attempts to take the power of the king, give it to the people. And a democracy only worked on a small level because every citizen had to be at every meeting every day to talk about every issue. And if you weren't keeping up with the issues, you're called an idiotus. And so there were 6,000 citizens of Athens, and they would gather in the Agora marketplace, and they would talk the issues and vote. And republics could grow larger because you would take care of your family and farm and have someone in your place that would go to the market every day to talk politics. They were your representative. Easy way to remember is republic begins with REP and representative begins with REP. So a representative form of government, we call a republic, but you're in charge. And so, but what if a dictator king wants to take the power away from the people and reconcentrate it? Does he just ask for it? And so that's the first tool. It's called fraud. And that they'll lie to you and tell you that they're taking away your freedoms for your own benefit, for your own good. But when people stop believing the fraud, the only other tool they have is force, fraud and force. And so that's when they purge their military and their Department of Justice and their army of anybody that has any morals, and then they'll enforce their dictatorship top down. And so it's interesting when you study how to get a population into fear so they panic and surrender their freedoms, you first have to create division. And so the word devil in Greek is diabolos, which means to divide. And, Psalms 133 says how good and pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. But Proverbs 6 says 6 things the Lord hates. And the last is he that soweth discord. So the discord, division, divide. And so the devil's cast out of heaven and he sows discord in the garden with Adam blaming Eve and Cain killing Abel. And he even sows discord after Gideon defeated 100,000 Midianites. And no country is even thinking about invading. But Gideon has an illegitimate son, Abimelech, who wants power. And so he goes to the town of Shechem and he does critical race theory. He says, is it better for you that the sons of Gideon reign over you? Remember also that I am your flesh and your bone. And his brethren spake of him in the ears of all the men of Shechem, and their hearts inclined to follow Abimelech, for they said, he is our brother. So they're dividing on the flesh and the bone level.
Mm-hmm.
And he goes to the city treasury, Temple of Balberith, and he takes money to hire rioters, Antifa, BLM type. And they gave him 70 pieces of silver out of the house of Balberith, wherewith Abimelech hired vain and worthless persons, which followed him to do what? Violence. They went to his father's house at Ophrah and slew his brethren, and the men of Shechem made Abimelech king. So you have a country completely at peace, no threat from the outside, but on the inside, you sow division, you sow discord. And now the Hebrew Republic would have ended here rather than a century later with King Saul, had not someone threw a millstone over the wall and it killed Abimelech. And another story is Machiavelli. He lived 500 years ago in Italy. Italy was a bunch of city-states that always fought. Venice, Genoa, Naples. And so Machiavelli thought if one prince could control all of Italy, it would stop the infighting. So his end was good. And he thought, well, how do I achieve the end? Well, any means necessary to get there is justified. Lie, cheat, steal. So if a prince conquers a city and the city does not want to be conquered, they would hate him. But if he pays criminals like Abimelech did, vain and worthless persons, to riot and smash windows, set things on fire, the people will panic and beg for help, and the prince will come in and get rid of the very criminals he bribed to create the mess. Nobody will know the better for it. and everyone will praise the prince as a hero. So it's called Machiavellianism, where you create or capitalize on a crisis to consolidate control.
Interesting. So this is not new, folks. Civil unrest we see in our streets, especially during the time of COVID within the last several years, nothing new. It goes back biblically in antiquity.
Yeah, and so you and I see a crisis. Our response is, how can we get people through it? They see a crisis. Their response is, how can we usurp power through it? Remember, Rahm Emanuel, never let a crisis go to waste. There's a quote from Ben Domenech. He was on Fox Primetime. He says, Rahm Emanuel's famous dictum, never let a crisis go to waste. Normal times don't produce the outcomes that the authoritarian left wants, because people are not scared enough to give them the limitless power they crave. Crises are necessary. And so if there aren't any on offer, they manufacture them. And so, quote from Henry Louis Mencken, 1956, he said, the urge to save humanity is almost always only a false face for the urge to rule it.
Mm.
And so the idea of creating a crisis, the devil sowing discord in heaven, in the garden, Machiavelli, Abimelech, the British Empire, it became the biggest empire on the planet. How did it get so big? Did they just walk into a country and say, hi, we want to be the biggest empire? Okay, here are the keys. We were waiting for you. Is that how it happened?
No.
Not normally. So let's look at how the British took over India. They landed in Bengal in 1714, opened a trading post that turned into a trading fort that turned into them having guns. And they would give guns to one kingdom, guns to another kingdom, and then they would stir up animosity between the kingdoms and get it to the place where there's bloodshed. Why? Because then people think emotionally and not logically, and then you can steer the emotion easy. And you would blame the leader of the country, and then you would have a coup and get rid of the king, and then the British would come in to restore order, and they would take control of both.
Like the French Revolution, kind of like that, right?
Yeah, that was a real model for it. The British tried doing it in America, and so the British General Burgoyne went to the Mohawk Indians and promised them money for scalps, and they would go ahead of the British Army and scalp, and it would sowing this fear, and it was even mentioned in the Declaration of Independence. The king has excited domestic insurrections among us, has endeavored to bring the inhabitants of our frontiers, the merciless Indian savages, whose known rule of warfare is an undistinguished destruction of all ages, sexes, and conditions. And so here, Americans and the Indians were getting along, with the British stirred them up. They sowed this discord. And the same thing happened during the War of 1812. British controlled Pensacola, Florida. Just north was the Fort Mims, Alabama.
Yeah.
And the British stirred up the Red Stick Creek Indians to kill over 500 of the Americans. And but this idea is, you want to conquer something, you first go in and get them to fight amongst themselves, and they weaken each other, and then it's easier to conquer both of the weakened kingdoms. And I wrote about this in Hegel. So George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel was a professor at the University of Berlin, and the King of Prussia had him after Napoleon had conquered Europe. The King of Prussia didn't want to be conquered that easy, and so he wanted to strengthen the state. And Hegel was the philosopher to help with this. And so Hegel took the Abimelech thing, took the Diabolos, devil thing, right? And he turned it into a nice, neat triangle. One corner is a thesis. The opposite corner is an antithesis or antithesis. And the top corner is a synthesis, right? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis. Say that 3 times fast. And it sounds complicated, but it's not. So you start off the thesis, the status quo. You create discord. You create a problem. You create a situation where everybody's in fear. And then they're willing to trade their freedom for security, and they'll settle for an answer that's just half as bad. And then that becomes the new starting point. You create another problem that's real bad. Everybody panics in fear, gives up some more of their freedoms to settle for an answer that's just half as bad. Then you create another problem that's real bad, and everybody panics in fear and surrenders some more of their freedom to settle for an answer that's just half as bad. And every time they settle, they're giving up a little of their individual freedom to the state. And so this is called critical theory.
Mhm.
And
Do you believe that these people are benevolent? The ones that do these, like you said, we respond by helping people. They respond by, I'm paraphrasing what you said, but utilizing this as an opportunity politically. Are we dealing with psychopaths? Or are we dealing with people that really believe that what they are doing is benign and maybe they are wearing out the ends justifies the means to the umpteenth level, like overdoing it? What do you think? Are we psychopaths, evil, or they really feel like that they're going to do something noble?
well, it's interesting that you would bring that up because that's almost an exact quote from George Orwell's book, 1984.
It is. I
And
know.
he talks about their tactics of seizing power. So this is the bad guy, O'Brien, telling the I don't know if you call him a good guy, but he's the one in the book that you're following named Winston.
Right.
And it's Orwell's book, 1984. And so Winston is basically, arrested and in the movie version of it, he's strapped down to a table, and so anyway. And so O'Brien tells Winston, there's no way in which the party can be overthrown. The rule of the party is forever. Make that your starting point of your thoughts. The party maintains itself in power. Now tell me, why do we cling to power? What is our motive? Why should we want power? Go on, speak. Winston said feebly, you are ruling over us for our own good. You believe that human beings are not fit to govern themselves, and therefore, that was stupid, Winston, stupid, O'Brien said. You should know better than to say a thing like that. I will tell you the answer to my question. The party seeks power entirely for its own sake. We are not interested in the good of others. We are interested solely in power, pure power. We are different from all the oligarchs of the past. German Nazis, Russian communists came very close to us in their methods, but they never had the courage to recognize their own motives. They pretended, perhaps, even believed that they had seized power unwillingly and for a limited time, and that just round the corner there lay a paradise where human beings would be free and equal. We are not like that. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it. Power is not a means, it is an end. One does not establish a dictatorship in order to safeguard a revolution. One makes a revolution in which to order establish a dictatorship. The object is power. Now, do you begin to understand me? David Horowitz wrote in Rules for Radicals, the Alinsky model. He said, the New Republic, Ryan Lizza nicely illustrates, when Alinsky would ask new students why they wanted to organize, they would invariably respond with selfless bromides about wanting to help others. Alinsky would then scream back at them that there was a one-word answer. You want to organize for power.
Wow.
So you have the low-level people thinking, oh, we want to do good, but the real people behind it, they could care less. They just want power. And they look at the low-level people as useful idiots.
Yep.
And
Interesting. And that might even go up to middle management too, not just the grassroots people, but that the higher up you go, there's no hiding our motives anymore. We are a group of narcissistic human beings, and maybe even on both spectrums. Go ahead.
So I'm quoting from my book on socialism, The Real History from Plato to the Present. But I have a quote from World War I fighter ace Eddie Rickenbacker. And he was one of the first pioneers of the conservative modern movement. He said, every time the liberals discover a new way to circumvent the constitutional limits of the federal government, they pile up more power in Washington at the expense of individual liberty across the land. The liberal would sweep aside the constitutional restraints upon government in a blind rush to supply food, clothes, house, financial security from birth to death, and from the cradle to the grave for everybody. The conservative knows that to regard man of a part of an undifferentiated mass is to consign him to ultimate slavery. Government is like fire, a dangerous servant and a fearful master. It needs limits. And then he made a phrase that Gerald Ford must have repeated 100 times, and Reagan. But the phrase was, a government that is large enough to give you all that you want is large enough to take away all that you have. And then Donald Trump, February 18th, 2019, the more power they get, the more power they crave. They want to run healthcare, transportation, finance, energy, education. Socialism is not about justice. It's not about equality. It's not about lifting up the poor. It's about one thing only: power for the ruling class.
Yeah, even to the point where they're going to maybe downsize our population someday. Because then you think, well, if they don't really care about us, then why do they even want us here? They're obviously 7 billion people on the planet is way too many for what they feel would optimize their lifestyle.
Yeah, they basically want to abort the human race, right? So abortion is what? Killing a human being. Well, what's the globalist movement? Killing humanity?
Right.
And then the people that are the very, very top, they know they're doing evil, and even they're deceived, because the devil's, Jesus says the devil's a liar. There's no truth in him. And so everybody up and down the ladder he lies to, and promises them something, but they're not even going to get what they're promised.
That's right.
So the idea of creating a crisis and having discord so that the public gets into panic and fear and then will trade their freedom for security. In the Congo, the people saw themselves as one, but the Belgian and German colonizers would measure them and their features and would classify one group as Hutus and the other as Tutsis. And then they made them go down to the government offices and register as Hutus and Tutsis. And then they would do violence against the different ones and blame it on the other one to get the two sides to fight each other. And when they fought each other and genocided each other, they would weaken each other, and then the colonizing power could come in and take control. And so they would even get into staging attacks so that they would look like they're from the other side, so that the other side would respond. But their goal was to light the match and get the two sides to fight. Castro said the revolution needs the enemy. The revolutionary needs his antithesis, which is the counter-revolutionary. And if enemies were lacking, they had to be fabricated. So you can't get people into fear if there's no enemy that you're going to save them from. You need an enemy. And if there aren't any, you fabricate them. It's like a white Christian nationalist supremacist. Watch out, they're the boogeyman. They're going to come after you. It's like, oh, save me. Okay, we're going to take away your freedoms. That's why when you have people like Patrisse Cullors, founder of Black Lives Matter, said we are trained Marxists. They're trained in breaking the country into groups and pitting them against each other. Jesus talked about this. He said in Mark 3:24, if a kingdom be divided against itself, that kingdom cannot stand. Lincoln gave an address, a house divided against itself cannot stand. It's like introducing an autoimmune disease into the body politic. What's an autoimmune disease? It's where your own immune system starts attacking your own organs and joints. You have a war going on inside of your own body. And so you weaponize the body against itself. So how do you destroy a marriage? Sow division. How do you destroy a family? Sow division. How do you destroy a church? Sow division. How do you destroy a country? Sow division. And so critical race theory is the division theory, right? Patriotism is the enemy, get people to identify with subgroups and pit the subgroups against each other. And so This was perfected during the Cold War period. It's called the Color Revolutions. Goes back to China, where they simply called one group like blues and the others reds or something like that. And then they pitted them against each other and they weakened each other so the Communist Party could seize power over all the groups. And so after World War II, country after country would fall with these tactics to the Soviet Union. So you'd have a new republic, things are going fine, trying to climb out of the post-World War II problems. And these KGB agents would come in and study the group. The one author said, it wasn't as sexy as James Bond. All they did was just study groups. And then they would find out who were the influencers in these groups. And then they would call some groups oppressors, and they would call other groups victims. And then they would pit them against each other. And so until there was a crisis, and they used the media to blame the leader of the country. And so you had to get people emotional. And so that's why you had to have the killing. I mean, think of October 7th, and like 1,400 Jews were killed. A tremendous amount of emotion. And the world is totally shocked with this, and this motion. They want to blame somebody. And then they co-opt the media to blame Israel. They channeled this emotion back toward the people who were the innocent victims. It's like in Islam. They rape a woman and then they tell her it's her fault because she tempted the man.
Right.
And so the women have to wear burqas to look unattractive on purpose. And if they get raped, it's their fault. They get whipped 100 times. The attacker blames the victim.
That's horrible.
And so you want to channel the emotion, and the news media is the it's like the nervous system of the body politic. And so that's why they want to control the nervous system. They want to control the responses. And so Eisenhower becomes president, and he can either sit back and watch these countries fall into the Soviet orbit or do something. And so when Iran starts to side with the Soviet Union, their leader Mossadegh, Eisenhower sends in Kermit Roosevelt Jr. He was the grandson of Teddy Roosevelt. It was Operation Ajax. And the head of the CIA was Allen Dulles, and his brother John Foster Dulles was Secretary of State. And so Kermit Roosevelt Jr. goes to Tehran, and he does the KGB thing in reverse. He studies all the groups, and he recruits mobsters and gangsters, and he stages protests and riots, and even has people dress up as one party to attack the other so that they'll blame the one party. And anyway, then co-opts the media to blame Mossadegh for all of the internal crises. And when the crisis gets bad enough, and Mossadegh falls in popularity because people believe the media, then they put him under house arrest, locked him away for the rest of his life, where he dies, and replaced him with the Shah. And then later, Jimmy Carter did the same thing to overthrow the Shah and let the Ayatollah take over. And but these tactics were used by the CIA in the Congo, Dominican Republic, South Vietnam, Brazil, and they were used by the KGB, who started FARC in Colombia with Che Guevara, and started ELN in Bolivia with Che Guevara, and then helped Castro take over Cuba. They had hundreds of these KGB coup attempts in Africa, and the KGB started the PLO, the Palestinian Liberation, or whenever you see a name with liberation in it, that's pretty much KGB. The colonizing powers would want to pit groups against each other. They did this in India. Uganda had like 56 different tribes, and they would study the different ones and find out which ones could be called oppressors and which ones could be called victims. And then they would have them fight each other. And then once they weakened each other, the British could come in and restore order. And they did the same thing in Nigeria, and sort of standard operating procedure. And
I will be in St. George on the 23rd, and you are invited for free. This is a very informal event. Just come and hang out and talk. And that will be at 914 South 100 East Washington, Utah, 84780. And that will be from 2 to 4 at the Forward Motion Medical Building. That's 914 South 100 East Washington, Utah, 84780. And interestingly enough, it'll be right after I visit the St. George Temple. I'm going to go do an endowment there. I've never been to the St. George Temple, so this will be the first time. We'll be going the morning of the 23rd, and that is a Wednesday at the Forward Motion Medical Building in Washington, Utah. That's 914 South 100 East Washington, Utah, 84780 from 2 to 4 p.m. The firm conference is coming up. So go. So I will be speaking Thursday. Yes. Speaking on the main stage on the first floor, 3:45 to 4:30. Eternal Echoes, the ancient esoteric gospel. That's the Firm Foundation featuring the 34th International Book of Mormon Evidence Conference. I've never been there, but I hear it's fabulous. Faithfully exploring relevant Latter-day Saint topics of our time. Thursday, Friday, and Saturday from 9 a.m. to 9 p.m. October 24th, 25th, and 26th of this year, just in a few weeks. Where's it going to be? At the venue at the Ranches, 4118 North Clubhouse Lane, Eagle Mountain, Utah, 84005.
And so I even talked to years ago people in our CIA, and they said they would go into some village and set it on fire and make it look like the communists did it, because all the villagers would come to our side and say, "Help us against the communists," and then they would organize them. I mean, it was sad.
And, well, then you feel that's not any better. That's the ends justifies the means kind of mentality. I don't know. How do you feel about that?
Yeah, well, they did it ostensibly for a patriotic purpose, to keep the countries from falling into the Soviet orbit. And so we could semi-justify it with that. But then Obama turned it all inward on America for political purposes.
Okay.
So Obama met with the head of the IRS, Lois Lerner, 147 times, and turned the IRS against conservative groups. And then the same thing with the NSA. It was just supposed to monitor foreign correspondence to prevent another 9/11. But Obama had the hopscotch thing, where if somebody's cell phone is talking to somebody overseas, they could monitor all the numbers on that cell phone, even the numbers that were American. And then they would hopscotch, and every number on that phone they would monitor, and then hopscotch, and every number on that phone they would monitor. And they don't call it a web for nothing, because everybody's eventually connected. And then Obama realized that instead of sending somebody overseas to orchestrate these coups, you could do it through social media. And so that's when our CIA began to use Facebook and all these different things to organize to overthrow the pro-West leaders in the Middle East, right? Mubarak and these different ones that were willing to work, and replace them with Muslim Brotherhood Islamic radicals. And so then, and Mike Benz talked about this on a Tucker Carlson interview, since the CIA was supposed to monitor foreign correspondence, once social media became all over, they said, well, we can't tell if somebody's posting something from some country in Africa, or if they're right here in America. And since we can't tell because it's a post on the internet, we have to track everybody on the internet, so we can see if somebody's overseas wanting to influence America. And
right.
And so then Obama in 2012 authorized using behavioral sciences upon the American population for their own good. Well, what's that? It's psychological operations, the same way they would do psychological operations in other countries to turn the country against their leaders so they would overthrow him. Obama approved using this in America, on American soil, for what he deemed is his version of protecting America, which is basically getting rid of conservatives. And And so then in 2016, Obama signed the Countering Foreign Propaganda and Misinformation Act. This was giving the government control to overall social media and all news websites. That's where you get, it was bringing back Operation Mockingbird.
Yeah.
What's Operation Mockingbird? So Alan Dulles, I already mentioned him. The country was not taking the Soviet threat seriously. And so he had 400 assets in the media that would take CIA talking points and weave them into articles to gradually steer the public to be aware of the Soviet threat. And then Carl Bernstein, Watergate reporter, in 1977, did an interview with the CIA and the press. And so he talked about the CIA feeding these stories to their assets in the ABC, CBS, NBC, New York Times, Washington Post, and then they would put it into a story and it would influence the country. In its early stages during the Spanish-American War, you had William Randolph Hearst and his newspaper. And there were reports of the Spanish treating the Cubans terribly and starving hundreds of thousands of them. And America didn't want to get into a war because we were tired of the Civil War. And so William Randolph Hearst sent the artist Frederick Remington to Cuba and said, you supply the illustrations and I'll supply the war, because they couldn't print photos yet. And he says, so he would draw these illustrations, of poor, emaciated people. And there were poor, emaciated people, but they would print it on newspaper with inexpensive paper that would turn yellow after a couple of days. So they called it yellow press journalism. And it was the government, it was, the usage of press to influence government policy and to influence the population. And originally it was for a good purpose, because the people were being starved down in Cuba. And then, during the Cold War, we didn't want any more countries to fall into the Soviet orbit. And the Soviets were doing this, but Obama turned it inward and then began to justify having the government, censoring Russian propaganda and Chinese propaganda. And it's like, but it's up to the government to decide what's propaganda and what's not. And since they want to get reelected, there's a strong temptation of them to classify anything that is could threaten their power politically, to label it, and so that's where you have, Hillary Clinton, right? So she approves transferring a fifth of the U.S. uranium to Russia, called Uranium One, and rather than her get blamed for colluding with Russia, she pays for a Steele dossier to accuse her opponent of colluding with Russia. And Trump has to go through an impeachment trial and everything. And finally, and during that process, the federal government subpoenaed all the evidence that could convict Hillary and destroyed it. Hard drives, servers in her basement, cell phones, laptops, delete, smash, right? And so they got rid of all the evidence that could convict Hillary. And
I always think of her acting naive when she said scrub. You mean like scrub with a sponge?
Yeah. And then you had Biden extorting Ukraine on C-SPAN. He bragged, I told them unless they stop investigating my son, I'm going to hold back billions of dollars of U.S. aid. And guess what? By the end of the day, they fired that prosecutor. Clearly, he's guilty of extorting Ukraine. But what do? They accuse Trump of extorting Ukraine. The exact thing. Now, why is that? It's called projection. It's a narcissistic response mechanism. When somebody's caught doing something wrong, they instinctively accuse the person that caught them. So with little kids, I didn't start the fight, you did. Or a cheating spouse will accuse the faithful spouse of being unfaithful. And it's in the Bible. Potiphar's wife accused Joseph of lusting after her when she was lusting after him. And so, and they did it to Jesus, right? They accused Jesus of being demon possessed. I mean, here are these Pharisees, their father's the devil, right? And they're accusing, and Adam did it to God. He blame shifted. Adam sinned. And what was the first thing out of his mouth? Well, it's the woman you gave me. She's the one that
Right.
you gave you. Everything was fine until you gave me this woman, right? Blame shifted. And so it's the instinctive, sinful response when somebody's caught. They've just taken it and done it on a national and international level where they do bad stuff and they accuse you. David Axelrod was campaign advisor to Obama. And on NPR radio, April 2010, he said in Chicago, there was an old tradition of throwing a brick through your own campaign office window and then calling a press conference to say you've been attacked and that your opponent did it. And then your opponent has to go through denying it to the media. And every single time they deny it, they're repeating it. And in the public's mind, it's guilt by association.
Yep.
That's why they would always coach candidates. Never repeat the accusation in your denial of the accusation.
Mm-mm.
And the classic was Nixon, where he said, I didn't lie. If he would have followed the correct advice, he would have said, I tell the truth. But instead, he said, I never lied. And so it forever cemented Nixon owning the word lie, because all people do is skim. I mean, few people might read every word in an article, but most of them skim. And if they see the name and the crime over and over and over again,
Right.
they make a subconscious connection. Where there's smoke, there's fire.
Even if they're found innocent, even if all the claims are dropped, if they can get 25% of the people to still continue to doubt, they can get them to doubt, then they've done their job.
Yeah. And if the finger's ever pointed back to the real guilty person, by that time the water's muddied and the public doesn't know who to trust, and they get a pass.
Mm-hmm.
And I was reading a 1960 Military Review magazine, the official publication of the U.S. Army. And in this publication, it had an article, the first article there, called A Review of Soviet Psychological Warfare. This example of propaganda technique called name calling is what psychologists call projection. If you do something wrong, then you accuse the enemy of doing it before they accuse you. The one who makes the accusation first has the advantage. So if you're doing something wrong, you immediately accuse your opponent of doing what you did. And the first one to make the accusation wins, because a certain percentage of the people are always going to believe and not do investigations. And so you see this over and over again. There's a quote from Charlie Hurt, and he was on Hannity, and he talked about this. He goes, this whole thing, this was May 23rd, 2019. This whole thing is like this game of projection. Whatever they accused President Trump of doing, we then find out not only did President Trump not do it, but they did it. And so they knew Biden had classified documents in his garage and that it was illegal. And so they staged a very visible attack to get documents that were at Trump's Mar-a-Lago. They know they were at Trump's place. They know they were secure, but all they wanted was the headlines. So they could say, Trump, classified documents, Trump, classified documents, the guilt by association. And if it ever gets pointed back at Biden, well, by that time, it's old news. And the prosecutor said, yeah, he's guilty of it, but he's an old man, so he gets off the hook.
Right.
Like, what? What did you just say? He's guilty of having classified? Yeah, he was guilty of having classified documents, but we're going to let him get off the hook because he's old and senile, and Trump's not. Trump's still smart. So, but I mean, all they wanted was the headlines.
And when you have the left media on your side anyway, that's a plus too as well.
Yeah. And again, it's in the Bible when Ahab was sinning. He was worshiping pagan gods, and he finally meets Elijah. And what's the first thing out of Ahab's mouth? Is that you troubler of Israel? And Elijah's like, excuse me, you're the one that's troubling Israel. And then you had the Pharisees saw Paul in the temple praying, and they grab him and wrestle with him, and they're pulling him apart, and they're causing an insurrection. And the Romans rescue Paul, and there's a trial. And Acts 24, Tertullus began to accuse Paul, saying, we have found this man a pestilent fellow, a mover of sedition among the Jews, and a ringleader of the sect of the Nazarenes, who has gone about to profane the temple. And then Paul answered, they neither found me in the temple disputing with any man, neither raising up the people, nor in the synagogue, nor in the city. Neither can they prove the things where they now accuse me. So the Pharisees stirred up the insurrection at the Capitol, but they blame innocent Paul for it. Nero did the same thing. He set Rome on fire and blamed the Christians. And so this tactic of the guilty person accusing the innocent person of what the guilty person is guilty of, Saul Alinsky, who Hillary Clinton did her senior thesis on, and who Obama was a Alinsky organizer in Chicago.
Right.
In the book, Let Them Call Me Rebel, it says, in 1972, students asked Alinsky to help plan a protest of a scheduled speech by George H.W. Bush, then U.S. Representative to the United Nations. Alinsky told them to go dressed as members of the Ku Klux Klan. And whenever Bush said something in defense of the Vietnam War, they should stand up and cheer and wave placards reading, the KKK supports Bush. And that is what the students did with very successful results. So you infiltrate your opponent's rally, and you create a disturbance that can negatively reflect on your opponent. And so it's an interesting tactic.
So why would Saul Alinsky want to do that? He's not someone in high power. He is a professor? Why are the college professors so adamant about sticking with this left narrative like that?
Yeah, they so Saul Alinsky grew up in Chicago and rode around with Al Capone's hitman, Frank Nitti. And saw that all they had to do was go into a neighborhood, kill a few people, smash a few windows, and the neighborhood would panic in fear and trade their freedom for security and agree to pay the mob protection money in exchange for being left alive. And Saul Alinsky said, let's just apply these tactics to politics. You create a crisis and get everybody in panic and fear. And then they would trade their freedom to have and so Saul Alinsky says the first job of a community organizer is community disorganization. Disruption of the present organization is the first step. The organizer's first job is to rub raw the resentments of the people of the community, to fan the flames of hostility to the point of overt expression. The community organizers must seek out controversy rather than avoid it. For unless there is controversy, the people are not concerned enough to act. So you want to create these crises to get everybody to panic and fear and surrender their freedoms. And then they want to do it on a global level, and that's where you get Klaus Schwab and the Great Reset.
Mm-hmm.
It's orchestrated global crises to get everybody to a healthcare crisis, food shortage crisis, financial crises, so that everybody goes to the government and says, help. And the government's like, okay, we're glad you asked, we'll help, but we're going to take away your freedom in the process. And then people believe the fraud and they give up their freedom.
And you can kind of see in like Rules for Radicals, and it's not about the party anymore. Or no, it's all about the party, or it's about the it's not about the ideology anymore, or why. It's about power, absolute power. And it's like football teams, right? Why are the Green Bay Packers your team? Because they've always been and always will be, right? And then it just comes down to that.
Yeah. Peter Thiel, founder of PayPal, was doing a lecture at Stanford Classical Liberalism Lecture, November 18th, 2022. And he said the the zeitgeist on the other side, and zeitgeist just means the attitude. The zeitgeist on the other side is we're not going to make it for another century on this planet. Therefore, we need to embrace a one world totalitarian state right now. Whatever the dangers are in the future, we need never underestimate the danger of a one world totalitarian state. 1 Thessalonians 5:3, this is Peter Thiel quoting this. 1 Thessalonians 5:3, the political slogan of the Antichrist is peace and safety. I want to suggest we would do well to be a little more scared of the Antichrist and a little less scared of Armageddon. What's he talking about? Don't be afraid of the world ending. Be afraid of the people that promise to save you from the world ending, right? And so but it's a manipulation of our desire to fit in. There's a quote. It was on The Simpsons. Somebody took a screenshot of it, and put it up as a meme. But it's got the little sister, and she's saying, if you allow the government to break the law during an emergency, they will create emergencies to break the law. And
I'll have it right here. I'll have it posted right here when you say that.
Yeah, well, so the idea is you create these problems, get everybody to panic, and they surrender their. But the Lord's response is what? Fear not, fear not, fear not. Over and over in the Bible, fear not. Do not make decisions out of panic and fear. The government wants you to get into panic and fear. Don't get into panic and fear. Stay in faith. Don't make decisions out of fear. Every generation has a crisis. Attila the Hun, Genghis Khan, bubonic plague, Spanish flu. If we get through this crisis, there'll be another one. We get through that crisis, there'll be another. It's sort of the human condition. And I tell people it's a crisis that brings people to Christ. So God has plan A and plan B. Plan A is he blesses us when we turn to him out of gratefulness. If that doesn't work, there's plan B. He hides his face and lets us experience the consequences of our selfish actions. And when it gets really bad, we turn to him in desperation. And his goal throughout it all is to have us turn to him. I mean, why did he make us anyway? We're not robots, created for fellowship, but he gave us a free will. So if he were to force us to turn to him, we'd be robots. So he's not going to force us, but he does have plan A and plan B. Before the flood, people were living centuries. Methuselah, 969 years. But it says, before the flood, the thoughts of man were on evil continually. They chose not to retain God in their thoughts, and it repented God that he even made man. It broke his heart. It's like, why did he even make him? Went through all this trouble to create everything, and we don't even think about him. And so after the flood, God did plan B. Shorter lifespans, more famines and floods and wars and crises. And people, guess what? We tend to turn to the Lord in times of crises. We should turn to him all the time, but at least turn to him in times of crises. So in times of crises is when people panic and fear and surrender their freedoms to the government. But it's also in times of crises that people turn to Christ. And then finally, it's in times of crises that leaders are raised up. And I use the illustration of a freshman chemistry class. And the teacher has a beaker with a solution and pours in a catalyst that causes a reaction. And some stuff precipitates, settles to the bottom of the beaker, and other stuff gets effervescent and bubbling, floats to the top. So the time period we're living in is our solution in the beaker. The catalyst that's poured in is the crises of our time period. And some people's response is to precipitate, to get heavy, to deny their faith and run away and hide and even take the mark of the beast. How can I survive unless the government's my nanny? And other people's response to the same crises is to get effervescent and bubbly and float to the top and say, okay, God, there's a crisis. Where do you need me? I'm dead. My life is hid with Christ and God. The apostles, when they were persecuted, they prayed for boldness. They didn't say, oh, take away the persecution. They said, grant your servants boldness. And so this is just our turn. We're the bride of Christ, and every romance novel builds up to a decision-making moment, a forsaking of all others and choosing the one. I mean, imagine a chick flick and it doesn't, right? The key point of the movie is that there's a forsaking of all others and choosing the one. And since we're the bride of Christ, I think God is pushing the world to a decision-making moment, and he's making it really clear, good side, bad side, and letting the evil be exposed. And he's like, okay, I need you to make your decision. We're getting close to the end of this romance novel, and God, devil, choose, right? And I'm not going to force you, right? You're not a robot. You have free will, but I'm going to make it really clear, God, devil, choose. And so this is our turn. And I think that it's exciting. And then the idea that God raises up leaders. What are the stories we love best in the Bible? Things look hopeless, and he raises up little nobodies, a Gideon, a David, a Moses. And it's just our turn. And so the more you spend time in the Lord's presence, the less you care about what other people say about you. The less time you spend in his presence, the more you're going to be swayed about what other people say. It's like, oh, I don't want anybody to cancel me. I don't want to lose some friends. It says many were going to follow Jesus, but they didn't do so publicly because they didn't want to be put out of the synagogue because they loved the praises of men more than the praises of God. Well, Jesus told Peter, pray lest you fall into temptation. What's praying? If you're thinking about God, you're spending more time in God. The more you care only about what God says about you, and the less you care about what other people say. And so we're sort of going through this period where I think God's pushing the world to a decision-making moment. And I thank God for you and for all the viewers that you're going to make the right decision and stand up for Jesus and let his kingdom be done through you on earth.
That's right. Thank you so much, Bill William Federer. And I love it, especially that God uses crisis as a catalyst to bring us to him. Thank you so much. And that's AmericanMinute.com.
AmericanMinute.com.
Where you can find the books that Bill mentioned that he has authored. And thank you so much for being here. The website will be in the description section, folks. And it's also posted right here at the bottom of the screen. Thank you, and come back again, brother.
Yeah, I look forward to it.
All right. You have a good day.
All right. Bless you.